Now I'm going to turn things over to Henry Zaks, a man who I personally think exemplifies not only what it is to be a person who cares about this community by pouring his heart and passion into it, but who has been truly blessed to see his love of this community and the Federation passed on to his son, Eric, and his grandchildren, including Ben. I can say with all certainty that it is Henry, through his giving, that has inspired me to give more and do more for my fellow Jews here in Hartford and in Israel. So I'm going to turn it over now to Henry Zaks.
Thank you, Jay. It's really a privilege to introduce my grandson, Ben. It's also wonderful. I'm a little emotional, but to see what kind of a wonderful program my daughter-in-law, Jessica, has with Dignity Grows. It's a privilege that my grandfather, my mother's father, was a member of the United Jewish Charities, predecessor to the Federation from 1915 to 1922. And it's really a privilege that my son, Eric, is such a great person, great family, president of the Hartford Hospital, and involved in so many different things. Our family, I hope, has set an example for others. It is very important to endow Hartford, a new program that I'm working on. And it's a privilege that Ben is on the Schechter School, where all of us feel a lot of warmth, and also to all the organizations in Hartford, be it the Wadsworth Athenaeum or the Oak Hill School. Each one of these organizations, Jewish Family Service, serve a great purpose. And it's a privilege that you've asked me to introduce Ben, who, as a great kid, went to Penn, worked and did for Teach for America, not 1 year, but 2 years, then went on to work for Ray Dalio's company in Westport. And he's doing a great job now in a new business. We're still in the cell tower business, but Ben has moved it to another thing. And sometimes I have a little drop of marijuana at night because it helps my shoulders a little bit. But I see Mark Seltzer is there. Mark Seltzer's family actually bought my grandfather's house back in 1950. And in 1922 rather. So with that, I'm going to introduce Ben, and I thank my family for being here, and I thank the community because we have a super community in all areas. And chop the crown, I have to say that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Henry. Wonderful words introducing your family. Before we start the interview, don't forget that you are welcome to share your own questions for Ben using the chat feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Ben?
Oh, I didn't realize I'm supposed to intro myself. So
no, you have a little, well, anyway, you were supposed to, I'll help you out here, buddy.
Thanks.
Eric Alpern's here. He's the doctor of pharmacy and the assistant manager of Fine Fettel's Newington location. He will be here to address any questions about medical usage, since Ben cannot answer those by law. For more personal questions, you can also email Eric afterward at ehalpern@finefettel.com. And throughout our presentation, we will be showing interactive poll questions. Answers to the poll questions will be anonymous, so don't hesitate to participate. All right, Ben, start us off. Give us a primer to the audience on the family decision to enter into the legal cannabis business.
Sure. So thanks everyone for joining. 100 people. I'm pretty impressed with that. And not one person has asked to be the chief tasting officer of our business in the chat. Just in the chat, I see Neil So that's a win for the beginning, because that's our most common question. But no, I really appreciate everyone for joining and for having us. You know, I 2.5 years ago about decided with my grandpa and my dad that I was going to come work for our family business, and I thought that I was going to work on the cell towers, and then my dad said to me, "Well, we're going from high to higher, and we're going from the cell phone towers to weed," and but it's really been a lesson in entrepreneurship and in creating a business, and just a new industry is really what it's been about. And so we really started because since cannabis is a federally illegal drug, you can't go get a small business loan. And so there were companies from around the country sort of looking for investment capital. And we started looking at that because the decks that they were sending and the information they were sending was all about the medical benefit of this plant. And my dad is obviously on the board of Hartford Hospital now, and my grandfather's been on the board, and our family's been really focused on healthcare a lot in our philanthropic life, as we are with a lot of other things. And then also my dad's been on the board of the Root Center, which was the Hartford Dispensary, an addiction services clinic in Connecticut. And so there's just this pull. And so he started to look at the research, and the research just said incredible things around what this plant could do for people's health and wellness. And then from there, Connecticut was having this application to come out with 9 more dispensaries. And as people who do things and don't just say things, or don't just put money in places and don't want to be a part of it, he said, let's go operate. And from there, we applied in a competitive round in Connecticut, and we're lucky enough to win a dispensary in Connecticut. We then acquired another dispensary and partnered with great partners for a second dispensary in Connecticut. And then over that time, we kept looking at new opportunities to grow the business. And with that, we created a partnership and then got a license in Massachusetts, where we cultivate outdoors and process. And then we have a medical and adult use dispensary in the North Shore, in a town called Rowley. And then in Rhode Island, we had potential partners come know we were investing. And then we looked at Rhode Island and said, there's a missing piece of the market here. And so in Rhode Island, we just do the middle section. So there's growing, there's processing, and there's selling. And so right now in Rhode Island, we process, and we constantly are looking for new opportunities and new locations and new lines of business to help grow each entity and help grow a business and grow and run a business the right way, treating customers, staff with incredible respect at every turn. And even though it's cannabis, it's work. And so we just do it, we try and do it the right way.
Great. So maybe you could shed light on some of the principles and values that you and the family use when you enter into a new business venture, and how that translated into this selection of this business.
Sure. So this is going to be easy for me to say, right? And some people may roll their eyes a little, but my grandfather has the biggest appetite for risk of any person in business that I've ever come across. And that means he's always trying to start and look at the new thing. And that's sort of a vision and a value that's instilled in me and to us. And yes, I have the opportunity to be able to do that, but it's another thing to want to go take said opportunity, right? And so for us, we're always looking to figure out what can be next. Where do we want to put our money? Where do we want to go operate to try and do more? And then we always try and give back, because I think, as everyone can sort of tell, and I promise the goal of this is not to like just laud my own last name and the people who I'm related to by any means, but everything that we do is to give more back. And so we look at that in our cannabis business. We look at that obviously in this community. We look at that in our broader world. And so it's this assessment of risk, taking on risk to do things right, to build more opportunity, to build up more capital, to then do good in the world, right? Tikkun olam and just the idea of tzedakah run true in, I think, the values that I was instilled with every single day. And without sort of those values, I don't think we could have come to the place that we are, and also continue to build the success that I think we're starting to build in the cannabis space.
On your website for Fine Fettle, which, in a minute you can maybe give a little explanation on how you came up with that name. You lay out your vision to be the premier marijuana company providing customized service and a superior experience. And anyone could put a vision statement together, but how do you put that into practice in the business?
So I think the first way we put it into practice is actually by treating our staff with the goals of the company, right? And so you're not going to be able to treat customers incredibly well if you're not treating your staff incredibly well. So, Eric is on, and I think we've got some other team members on here, but right, we try and have them have a place where they want to come to work. Like, one of our core values is be excited when you wake up every morning. And that means coming to work because you love what you're doing. And you can only love what you're doing if you've set a culture where people are treating you well from the top. And that has to sort of interplay throughout every level of the business. And so even though we sell medical and now adult use cannabis, we're really a customer service company, because our goal is for people to want to come back to us. And in different markets, that means different things. But for us, it means every customer is an individual, right? We have patients coming in who have post-traumatic stress disorder, who are going through chemo with cancer, who are HIV positive, who have just back pain, who can't sleep, who want to be more creative at work. We run the gamut. And so it is so far from a one-size-fits-all model. And some of these dispensaries, and we've looked at like decks that talk about this, is they're proud of themselves because they get a customer in and out in like faster than McDonald's, right? And for us, I always say, like, I'd much rather have a customer spend 5 minutes instead of 2 minutes, because those extra 3 minutes are what makes them come back. And so from a business standpoint, that's good. But from an experience standpoint, that's great. And so that's really how we go about doing that. And I think your mission statement can sound good, but you need to like live the values of your mission statement every day as a company.
Yep, couldn't agree more with that. And your focus on health and wellness obviously sheds light on how important this industry is. So, you mentioned Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and obviously the home base of Connecticut. How do you evaluate entering into new markets? Are there any new markets that you guys are looking to go into this year?
Sure. So, cannabis has had this like range and arc over the last 3 years as just an industry. It was sort of a like, anyone could try and get in at the beginning, and anyone could try and get in at the beginning. And then it became this like battle of putting places on a map. And then it became, well, what is the right business type? And so we look at every assessment and we look at every single opportunity differently. And so in Connecticut, our model has to be different than it is in Massachusetts or Rhode Island. And so for example, in Connecticut, there were an application for dispensaries. And so we applied, right? Getting into a market where, there wasn't a ton of competition, right? We felt was the right entry point for us. In Massachusetts, though, for example, there are a ton of operators. I'm sure if you're driving on 84 or 91, north-ish and east-ish, because 84 sort of runs in a diagonal. That's why I say ish for 84. But you see cannabis billboards everywhere. If you were on the Berlin Turnpike pre-COVID, hopefully you saw our billboard, right? And so in Massachusetts, it's everywhere. And so our model in Massachusetts was like, well, if there's a lot of people who have spent a ton of money building out the equivalent of Ford manufacturing facilities, we felt we needed to look at a different market, right? And so we wanted to be someone who is growing more cost effective and more cost available product. And, so we went and said, you know what, let's grow it outside. Let's spend a lot less money up front, and let's try and maybe not see the highest of revenue number, but let's be more profitable. Rhode Island, same idea. There's 3 dispensaries in Rhode Island and 35 growers. That's not a great ratio of customer, but we looked at menus and said, hey, there's not a lot of companies who are processing the product. So we built a lab. And so as we go into new states, I'm really, really competitive. As if my brother's on and family, they definitely know that. I'm hyper competitive. And so, we want to be in places where it's hard to win, where we're first to market. And we also want to be in places where we see the potential for growth and creating sort of like a good opportunity market. So, yesterday, actually, we applied in Georgia. In Massachusetts, we're looking to be in unique and distinct markets. We just applied in Rhode Island. I went to college in Philly. I love Wawa, which is like a sandwich sort of locally shop. And we sort of thought to ourselves, like, why can't we be a hyper regional brand who's really well known so that we can corner our market and operate well? Because at the end of the day, you've got to operate efficiently. So that's really how we think about sort of each new opportunity as a one-off versus we're just going to buy a swath of things, or we're just going to go to Oklahoma where anyone can get a license, because it's not about placing your flag on the map for us. It's about running each business operationally profitably.
So, you're in a bunch of different states. You got obviously different regulations, state compliance departments that are regulating these industries. How do you staff appropriately to handle all the compliance requirements in these states?
People who are much better than me at the right jobs for them. In Connecticut, we have pharmacists who run our stores, right? They are not by nature specifically retail managers, but they run things so operationally efficiently and so safely from a compliance perspective and with so much care to the patient that that I'm confident that they do it well. But my management team, like, I really only asked them, because I knew they were pharmacists, so they were going to have a certain skill set. And so the only questions that we really asked them about were leadership, because as a startup, we need to make sure that we've got a team who can take a lot on themselves. And so, like, those people need to be leaders, right? We have an HR manager, for example, who had background running recruiting and HR for a company across various states. And with so many different rules, I don't have time to memorize all the rules, and I don't have time to go through what all of the pieces are. And so we hired her because she has the skill set to do the work, but she actually has the values and abilities to care about doing it right and to treat people with that respect. And so it's all about, like, putting the right team around you. I know nothing about growing marijuana, but we do it in 3 different places now. And so you hire people who are smarter and better than you. And yes, I learn and I ask hard questions to make them think about the answers I don't know. But I'm sure if we can dig it out, they know. And so that, to me, is sort of the key of, like, really managing in a way where everyone is adding the most value to the business that they can in their role, because they're the right person for the job. And that's just sort of like a cultural thing, because my view is, if you've got to do everything by yourself, you're the bottleneck and you're the problem.
What about marketing? So you mentioned that you guys had advertising on the Berlin Turnpike. How do you market your business? Obviously, the commercialization of marijuana carries some stigma around it. And how do you how do you handle the challenges between the 3 states that you operate in that are all, next to each other, and who leads the efforts in your marketing?
Sure. So one thing of, like, what I was just talking about is you need people in a team. For too long, we were marketing just by, like, being scrappy and having fun social media and responding to every person who clicked. And, like, just 3 weeks ago now, I hired a marketing manager because we needed to, like, institutionalize and systemize the way we were doing marketing. But then there's difficulties around that, because every state has totally different laws of what's allowed. And so in Connecticut, like, if there are questions about getting your medical marijuana card, or how effective is it as medication for various things, like, while I've got some answers, I actually legally cannot respond to them on this call, on this meeting. And so that's one of the reasons why we've got Eric right here to be ready to answer if that's the right thing. But we also need to affect our marketing that way. In Connecticut, and I don't know if folks go to other dispensaries or if anyone's got their medical card here. It's a HIPAA violation for me to say if I knew anyone did anyway, even though my grandpa sort of gave it away. But, in Connecticut, I felt like there were 9 dispensaries before, and there were 4 growers before. And people used to go to a dispensary to buy a certain medication brand that they liked. From a marketing perspective in Connecticut, our goal was to say, you know what? You belong to the Fine Fettle fam. You come to Fine Fettle to buy your medication, and our pharmacists are going to help you find the right medication. So you're not the buyers of the product, you're the attendee of a store. And that was like a really fundamental shift. And so we really tried to do things like make people feel at home and make people feel like an individual. And we've done a really good job of that. In Massachusetts, it's a totally different animal because there's 8 or 9 million people who live in Massachusetts, and every single one of them who's over the age of 21 is a potential customer. And I probably didn't do a good enough job understanding the way to market towards that because I was used to Connecticut. It was a huge reason I brought on a marketing manager because she's got a ton of community engagement background and growing businesses when you're in a market that feels saturated, because in Mass, these dispensaries are coming on more and more. And so, we've got to figure out sort of how to do that next. How do you have to reach 9 million people? Like, is that the answer to a market like that? And so doing it right and different is really key for us.
Sam, you could share the first question. That'd be great.
And then I've seen in the chat from a few people, how'd you come up with the name Fine Fettle? So while the question's coming up, I'll just give the example. So Fine Fettle means to be in good health or good condition. It's sort of an old English term. And the movie The Darkest Hour from Winston Churchill, where he's the focus, and he doesn't get along with the king very well. And Winston Churchill wasn't like a small guy, and he didn't exactly eat super healthy. And so during one of the first meetings, the king comes in and Winston Churchill's in the bathroom, and he comes, all the bathroom noises that come in movies, or maybe your own bathroom sometimes, I don't know. Those are coming out of the bathroom, and then the king comes out, and he says to Winston, how are you? And Winston says, I'm in Fine Fettle. And honestly, from a marketing standpoint, we didn't want to be green this, green that, health this, wellness that. We wanted to have a name that people had to ask so our staff could tell the story, and then no one is going to forget what Fine Fettle means. And so that's part of the branding and part of being different and part of being memorable as a company that we're really trying to, take hold of every day.
That's great. All right. So, in 2011, obviously, Governor Malloy signed the legislation which decriminalized cannabis possession. Subsequently, the year later, he signed the medical marijuana program into the state. As of last year, Connecticut is one of 35 states that have legalized the medical marijuana program. So, for the audience, explain what that means to be in a medical marijuana program, both in terms of cultivating and testing cannabis that would be released into the market, and how individuals can qualify for their medical marijuana card.
Sure. So what it means to be in a medical marijuana program, I'll talk about Connecticut specifically because I think most of us are here, but in Connecticut, there are 18 dispensaries and there are 4 cultivators. We are very highly regulated, which means that every seed that comes into to one of the growers' facilities, to every ultimate product that goes into our dispensary is constantly tracked and constantly audited all throughout the supply chain. In addition, every single product that comes into us for sale is rigorously tested for potency of the various cannabinoids, THC, the famous one that gets you, am I allowed to say hi, Eric? I'm allowed to say hi a little. All right. It gets you high. And then CBD, which is which there's studies that say is a strong anti-inflammatory. You can tell I'm working on my marketing language, as well as various terpenes, the essential oils essentially that are in the product that give it smell, but also health and medicinal values. And so all of those pieces. And then also, were there pesticides that this was grown in? Were there, is there mold in the product, right? There's incredible stringency around what is allowed to come into our facility. This is not buying weed from the dealer on the corner. I mean, our facilities are safer than banks and safer than most prisons. Our vault regulations in Connecticut are tougher than a vault regulation in a bank, literally. Every square inch of our facility, other than the restrooms, the break room, and the patient consult rooms, because of HIPAA, are 100% under cameras that we keep for 90 days. Super, super, super stringent. And you need to qualify to get your medical marijuana card in Connecticut. So there's a list of 35 some odd qualifying conditions, as I noted before, stemming from having pain for more than 6 months, post-traumatic stress disorder, people who've gone through trauma, right, in many different ways, cancer, HIV, glaucoma. I mean, there's 35 of them. Epilepsy for children, that allow people to get their card if they're certified by either their physician. A lot of physicians in Connecticut aren't doing it yet. So there are these sort of doctors and nurses who focus on this and will help you get your card if you're deemed fit. And then you can come in and purchase the right amount for you on a monthly basis. And one of the beauties of Connecticut's program, again, are these pharmacists who really understand the product differently. So it's a really interesting, it's a really incredible sort of market and plant. And every state has a sort of similar structure to that, but Connecticut's, I think, is really, really well done, and a program that the state can and should be proud of in terms of the quality of product, actually the price as compared to most medical markets, as well as, just having great people working in these dispensaries.
All right, we got a really good question from someone in the audience. So is there a difference in the final product to the end user based on where the product is grown? And is there a consistency of strength based on the growing environment or location?
Sure. So every cultivator sort of does it a little bit different way. And at the end of the day, these are plants and they're fickle, right? So unless you're doing a full extraction of the plant, which means you take the plant and you pull out only the cannabinoids and the smells and the different things that you want, that's what's going to make it perfectly consistent. And those are all tested. But it definitely makes a difference how and where the product is grown and by whom, right? They have different recipes, essentially. Should it be this humid or that humid? Should it be 78 or 76 degrees? Should it be grown in soil, or should it be grown in rock wool and hydroponically? Should it be grown inside or outside? And the variance and background of the strain all make a ton of difference. And so, the person who's one of the people who's asking this question is clearly keyed and clued in here. And so, for example, like in Massachusetts, we believe that the power of the actual sun, not lights pretending to be the sun, do amazing things for the terpene profiles of the plant. And so we think we're going to have really strong, pungent, aromatic products that have a lot of medicinal benefits from the terpene profiles versus, running it like a just manufacturing system where everything is the same, because the sun is different every day. The cloud coverage is different every day. And so all of those pieces definitely make a difference in what product you end up with.
Okay, we got a couple more questions. Man, now we're getting some real good ones. Is the cost of medical cannabis partly or fully covered by insurance companies?
It is not at all covered by insurance companies. The only part that may be able to get insured is a visit with your doctor. If your doctor is your primary care physician, or you're going for a reason, is also a prescriber. Cannabis is illegal federally. It's illegal federally. And so there are a lot of limitations around research. There's a lot of limitations around transport. The second you transport between state lines, you are a drug dealer, right? And so there's a lot of elements that sort of lead to varying differences of how these programs are set up and the product in different places, and just the effect of all of the various markets.
Well, you mentioned research. Well, so can you discuss the role of scientific research in the medical marijuana process?
Yeah, so research, again, is federally funded research in the United States around cannabis is illegal. And so all research needs to be privately funded or funded out of state coffers where the money is clearly not come from federal funding dollars. Accounting is always, right, a thing. But But so like in Connecticut, though, there are a lot of researchers who are looking at various types of research around cannabis, whether it be the plant or psychology or driving or various different things, where they're trying to understand this product more from a health medicinal benefit, from an economic standpoint, right? Understanding the plant and strains, understanding just every element of the various disciplines around a university. I mean, we went and spoke to UConn. We started a 501c3 nonprofit around the study and granting of funds for cannabis research. And even though illegal, there were like 35 professors at UConn who were researching cannabis in some way, none of whom using specifically the plant or getting federal funding dollars. And so we do hope that if and when federal like cannabis comes off a Schedule 1, there becomes more research, and this is less of and we find out if there's more questions or more answers that come out of this. But until then, there's still always going to be a lack of understanding around the potential of what this plant does, because until you've got a really good study, it's subjective. And when it's subjective, you're always going to get naysayers who don't trust the data. So it's this fine balance. It's this fine balance of how it happens.
You feel the stigma around marijuana has been reduced with the advent of medical marijuana?
So I feel like the stigma has been reduced as a whole. I don't know if everyone knows that the stigma can be reduced, right? Because I think that there's not enough information out there about it. And we come out of sort of two really anti-drug generations, in a sense, right? We come out of like the anger for hippies in a certain sense of the 50s and 60s, which led to a lot of just political sort of anti-cannabis information, and the 1980s, which was the war on drugs, which, you know, I'm not going to get super political right now, but had an enormous effect on just arrest rates and I think the inner cities in the United States. And so we're coming out of two generations where the story has been really anti-cannabis. And so, yes, I think as an industry and as people who are not reminding folks of the drug dealer, and there are pharmacists and there are private equity funds coming into this industry, I think it does start to change the narrative around what is happening here. How legitimate is this? What is this doing for people? And every new person who comes into the dispensary and tries it is the potential to be a believer or not. And so, that sort of thing changes over time. And, I think the world as a whole liberalizes over time. I'm not talking about politically liberal or conservative. I'm talking about the openness to opportunity, right? I mean, I think we look at last summer and look at the Black Lives Matter movement and look at what sort of folks are asking for, and also looking at the civil rights movement. And it is clearly a shift and change of liberalization of what things can be. And I'm not saying what is right and what is wrong, but I think cannabis continues on that spectrum. And as we have more information in the world, like we're doing this on video chat, right? That's a liberalization and openness of allowing people to attend events. And so I think, don't use the words in the left, right, conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat sense. Think of it as opening up of availability of information. And I think with that, stigma begins to, I don't know if it goes down, but it begins to change, which I think is more important.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Ben, because we're a decade into Connecticut, pushing through the decriminalization, right, of possession. And so now, just as recently as yesterday in the current, headline, will recreational marijuana be legalized in Connecticut this year? The article went on to say that lawmakers believe that better than average chance it will pass. They thought it would have passed last year, but COVID hit, and that kind of derailed some prospects of that legislation. How do you guys see this?
So I personally think, this is my view, that there's a lot of things about cannabis that are a hell of a lot safer than alcohol. But I also understand that there's an unknown around risk. right? Like, what is sort of the long-term effects of cannabis on young folks? And that means you need to have a system that is safe and strict around its distribution and possession. I fully understand that, but I do think that it's time that we sort of look at things in a more open view around what are people using cannabis for, even in a recreational market, generally is some sort of medical view. I can't sleep at night, right? And so you take it right before bed. It doesn't affect you anything in the morning at work, but it helps you sleep without pain. I mean, in Connecticut, only 50,000 people, so roughly less than 2% of the state has their medical card. But I would guess more than 2% of people on this call have had chronic pain for more than 6 months that they don't know what to do about. And they've probably looked into buying CBD on Amazon. But if you mix CBD and THC and just come to the dispensary to buy a cream, maybe it would be more effective. I'm not exactly sure, but we haven't sort of gotten to the point where we can find out. And I think that, I think that there's so much good that this plant does. And I'm not actually on this call by any means to like be a political advocate. But I do think that, we have to take a look back and say, hey, well, why was cannabis and even hemp, why were those illegal, right? What are we worrying about? What is the comparison in a market? And I do think, yeah, it's time for Connecticut, let alone that there's tax money and our state could probably use some tax money. It's what good can we do for people in society, but also how do we do it right and safe? And I think finding that balance is important.
So your Massachusetts business does both, right?
Correct.
Adult use and medical marijuana. If Connecticut does pass this, I mean, are you guys working on a plan to incorporate and pivot into that market?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, from a business perspective, for us to be the first to market in adult use is important and good for us. And, from a regulatory standpoint, I wouldn't want anyone else opening up a market and opening up a store selling something that people are unsure about. I would not want anyone more than my pharmacists. And so I think there's a safety that people can feel comfortable with the program. Not all pharmacists are perfect. They've done a lot. Not all pharmacists are perfect, but for this, I think it's an unbelievable way to start. And so, yes, we'd like to be first to market in being able to do it because I trust our team. And from our business standpoint, we didn't just look at our dispensary and say to ourselves, well, okay, there's only X number of patients and this is what we need to be ready for. We planned our facilities with the opportunity for expansion if it came and if people wanted it. So from both a business standpoint and operational standpoint, we're always sort of thinking ahead on what do we need to do to be ready.
Okay, we got another question from the audience and it ties into actually our next topic anyway, so it's good. So federal government classifies marijuana, Schedule I narcotic. There's 15 states that have legalized recreational marijuana use. 35 states have legalized medical marijuana use. The House in December passed legislation decriminalizing marijuana, expunging nonviolent marijuana-related conviction, and it is yet to be taken up by the Senate. How much longer do you think federal law can be in contradiction with state law?
I mean, up until January 6th, I would have said ask Mitch, but I think, hey, there's 50 Democratic senators, and while I hate to think that this is a partisan necessarily issue, hey, politics are a little bit partisan right now, if people didn't recognize that in our country. But we do have a Democratic House and Senate and president for the next 2 years. And so, but, right, like, who knows? Senators like Cory Gardner from Colorado, I mean, Colorado schools have gone from like 30th to 9th in the years that they've been receiving cannabis tax money. And they also are building a train from the airport in Denver to the mountains. And so I'm not saying it's all the same, but they're also doing like $1 billion in cannabis sales and getting like a 14% tax. I mean, that money doesn't exactly hurt the state. And so when is it going to happen? I'm not sure. I think personally, we've got bigger fish to fry, like, I don't know, an infrastructure bill or
Like that.
right, different things. But I think over the next 2 years, there's a real opportunity that at least there's an opportunity to set the laws to the states, and then we can go back to Republican and think states' rights and have them decide sort of how should this happen. Do I think we're going to have just like an open market system in the next 3-5 years? Probably not, because at the same time, while Connecticut doesn't have the weather to grow all year round that California does to grow marijuana outside, we've already in Connecticut created probably 500 jobs in this industry. And if you only have jobs in dispensaries because you're shipping in other stuff, well, there's 4 cultivators here with 60 employees probably. So that's 240 jobs that we just want to give up. And so there's a lot of nuance to how these things happen and move forward. And so, I think in the next 2 years, at least decriminalization and taking it off the Schedule 1 is really reasonable. Do I think we're going to have, the equivalent of Jack Daniels or Bud Light just everywhere grown, processed in one facility in one state, going all over the country? No, I think we're pretty far from that.
All right, let me give you a little 2-part question here. So with some political uncertainty, obviously, do you see any effect on being able to scale your business? And the second part of that is obviously this industry is growing exponentially. Okay, so how do you marry some of this scalability issues with your growth strategy to continue growing responsibly?
Yeah, for us, I mean, I wonder what Henry and Eric would think about this answer, but for us, right, scalability needs to be within reason because we need to pick the right opportunities. We can't just go, right? This isn't, just being anywhere and is good, right? Because as I noted before, you've got to be in a market where you've got opportunity to run a good business. And so, again, we're really competitive. In Georgia, they're giving out 6 licenses there for cultivation. There are probably going to be 120 applicants, but we think we put together a really good application that I stayed up all night the last 3 nights finishing. And then we submitted yesterday morning, and now we sit there and wait. And so we've got to look at like next states and next places on how do we scale in the right way. The other way that we as a business try and scale is, what does distressed mean, right? Who is an operator who needs help? Who is an operator who could use our back of house expertise? We're like hyper efficient in paying bills. There's a lot of people who came into cannabis and wanted to be in this industry. And then they're like, excuse my language, they're like, holy shit, like I got to run a business here. And that's not so easy. And that's really important. And, at the end of the day, it's about winning and losing and doing well. And even if you're in the ACC, you still have to win games if you're Syracuse basketball. So, that's really important. If people didn't read the comment, we've got David Gellis talking crap from a Syracuse perspective. They don't win games, 1 championship in 20 years. I mean, that's just sad.
All right, let's get back on topic. What are some of the unique challenges you face operating in a family business?
So I describe it as there's family, there's business, and there's family business. And they are all equally important in a sense, right? The business is less important. The family business and the family are the most important things, but they're all incredibly important. And, I work every day again with my dad and grandpa, and we each have a unique skill set. I think and we're each good and bad at different things. And one of the beauties of working with your family is that there is an inherent trust of the person, right? Which means there can be incredible transparency in the way that you talk about things. And so I don't have to hold back in telling my grandpa on Sunday morning that he's being crazy about an alarm going off, because I don't have to sort of worry about that. But I also need to respect the fact that every dollar that we spend has an effect on us because it's our money. And so being able to sort of navigate and be honest about who is good at what, but also like reflecting back on why everyone cares is a really difficult and important balance. I'm lucky that no one's all that sensitive in the Zach's family. I'm lucky that we, can talk about things without worry of repercussion of people feeling too bad, and then be able to move on to the next thing, because we all have sort of a key central goal in mind, which is growth, which is to get along, which is to have fun and to do well, and then to ultimately give back because we did well. And so I think if your value system are aligned and there can be honesty and transparency between the group, that's what sort of allows us to do it without killing each other.
Well, Ben, as we wrap up our conversation, it's an opportunity to discuss the legacy of your family and our community. And I know Henry touched on it and you started off the conversation with that. But from the Zach's Family Foundation to Jessica's impressive vision and leadership with Dignity Grows, how do you mesh your family's core values of Tzedakah and Tikkun Olam into Fine Fettel's philosophy of corporate social responsibility?
Yeah, so in all of our entities, we have like core areas where we donate to and different things of that nature, right? So we've really focused on health and wellness. We focused on addiction services in all the states where we operate, and we've focused on veterans. Honestly, because one of our initial partners was a veteran, and explained sort of the immense amount of trauma and then the incredible effect cannabis has on PTSD. And so those have been some of the real focuses for us. And then, right, we have an incredibly diverse team and staff. We got 5 or 6 managers now, and all but one is a minority, right, and an immigrant. And so we also, I'm not blind to recognize that I'm a white guy who's trying to make money in an industry where a ton of Black and brown people have gone to jail for selling way less than we sell in 1 hour, right? And so we try and do that. And we, as I said before, we only make money to give more away. And that is, like you talked about the last question with values, and that is sort of like a key tenet of why are you doing this? Why are you working so hard? I mean, we don't change how we act and operate, except for that we give more money away. And that, I think, is, it might be easy for me as Generation 3 to say, who, might have won the genetic lottery from a financial perspective. I don't pretend that that's not true, but that means you got to work harder to do more and give back. And so, at the end of the day, that is really, really how we sort of stick to those core values and do it the right way, because it's all that I've been taught from day one. And if we're not doing that, we're not doing that, we're not actually going to run our business well, because then we've lost sight of our goals and values.
Great.
Cool.
All right. So
Yeah. Well,
great conversation. Thanks for including me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Ron. And thanks everyone for joining.